So one thing that we wanted to do is I want to introduce you guys to broadcast receivers. We talked about that, when we talked about the main building blocks. So what I would like to do is, if you remember, what the broadcast receiver is a way to subscribe for certain events. So basically, you're saying when something happens, right? Notify me. Okay, that's what a broadcast receiver is. It's pretty straightforward, right? Got it? When something happens, you get a notification. Okay, so where do we want to use this in our example? So one place that I have it here is to start our updater service on boot, right? So basically, I want to have a broadcast receiver which subscribes to a system notification which says system got booted, so that when system gets booted, we simply start our service. In other words, that ensures that our service is always on, always running. You don't have to mentally remember and go and start it, right?
So is it application starting or the system start?
So the system is sending a broadcast and waking up boot receiver. It's saying, hey, you wanted to know when I get booted. This just happened. Now this guy is going to start the updater service. Does that make sense?
So basically, like it's a cron job in a sense, right? Well, I mean, meaning that you can say like if it's 12 midnight, notify me.
Sure. Yeah, sure. But yeah, if there's but it's a publish subscribe. It's like telling your broker, yeah, if this stock hits that, sell, or telling your real estate broker, if you see a nice 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in my neighborhood for sale, let me know. It's like you're subscribing for some certain event. That event may never happen, right? And you may be doing zillion other things. You just get woken up. You get a phone call when it actually does happen, right? Does that kind of make sense? Cool. So we're gonna start with this one because it's very straightforward. So we're gonna create a receiver that gets woken up at boot. So first we're gonna define it. Later on we're gonna register it. Okay. So to do that, I'm gonna close all this. So to do that, just like before, to create a new broadcast receiver, we start with the new Java file, right? So I'm gonna right-click, new, class, right? And I will say boot receiver, something like that, right? So that's all I entered, just the name of the class, boot receiver.
You can always, when it says superclass, you can always put,
yes,
it's easier.
if you want, yeah, absolutely. You could just type it in here and all that. I try not to depend too much on the tools. So other than for some, yeah, no, especially not the dialog boxes. I like tools when it's a self-completion and stuff. But either way, either way it will work. So I'll write here extends broadcast receiver. Okay. Organize imports, and then add unimplemented methods. Bam, bam, bam. So that really created my little basic template for the file. So we now just have a basic, broadcast receiver template. So far, so good?
You were mentioning publish subscribe mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me who's publishes and who subscribes?
Yeah. So PubSub is it's a kind of like a pattern, right? So this guy is subscribing. It's saying I want to know when something happens, like house is for sale, stock is hitting certain thing, boot is completed, battery is running low, whatever that something that you want to know is. So you're subscribing to that event. When that event happens, if and when that event happens, you get published, right? It's kind of like you subscribe to a magazine and somebody publishes it, right? So that's
it can subscribe to some cloud event also.
Yeah, there is a new feature in Android since Froyo, and it's called cloud to device messaging. So there is a way to have a app server or something via cloud send a message to the device.
Question, I don't know if you know that, but the app server, is it something you could deploy and manage your own?
No, this is Google. This is a Google App Server. Yes, yeah. So this is Google is managing this. Yeah.
So in the emails, like we have push, right? So Exchange server, we have push mechanism. Is
Right.
that something use the same functionality or it's different?
Yeah. So it's a good question about the push. So if you look at our algorithm here, like how we did this, we did a pull here. Okay, so what that means is that we're gonna be like every minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever that is, we're gonna be asking for tweets, and we're gonna be getting all 20, and chances are that like all 20 are gonna be repetitive. So you may get like 5, 6 new ones a day, but you have what 3,600 minutes in a day or something, right? Or whatever number is. So you're gonna make so many calls and waste so much bandwidth and power and all that stuff. So in other words, pull is very inefficient. It would be much more efficient if we could say, hey, online service, let us know when there's a new tweet, and you only get notified when there's something meaningful, as opposed to you saying, is there something new? No. Is there something new? No. Is there something new? No. Right? So that's really inefficient. Unfortunately, we don't have a pub sub mechanism with a cloud as of right now, right?
So even that means even push is not available in Exchange. Let's say if I have my corporate mail, there is no push mechanism available in Android as of now.
Well, so Android does have a certain push mechanism, but again, it needs to be with something that supports it. So Gmail, Gtalk, all those things effectively work like a push, right? They're actually implemented as a mini pull because there is a certain like something that pings the server every once in a while, but it's essentially it looks like a push, right? So
Okay.
yeah, but in our case we don't have that feature, so we can't really do it that way. So unfortunately. So back to this guy. So we have now. So this is the receiver, and this is how it's gonna get woken up. So when the event happens, whatever that event is, right? Regardless of the event, this is how every single broadcast receiver looks like. It wakes up, right? So this is like a template. Copy paste it for every single receiver. You're done, right? Okay. So now, what's gonna be the one line of code that we're actually gonna do in here?
So we want to start the server.
We're going to start.
Yeah, so we're simply gonna do. See now, if I try to do start service, that method doesn't exist,
It's out of context.
right? Because it hangs off of a context. Here's how it's slightly different in services and activities, which are also main building blocks. They were subclasses of context. In other words, service and activity is a context, right? Broadcast receiver has a context. So it's slightly different. Context is passed to it. It in itself is not a direct child of. But regardless, it's readily available. So the only difference is that we have to say context dot start service, and then I need to create that new intent.
But would we not want to listen for a specific one? I mean, would we not filter the one we see to see if it's the one that we need?
So this is the part where we do what we do when we are notified.
I see. So somewhere else.
Exactly. Yes. Somewhere else we're gonna register. Yes. And then updater service. This would work, right? And essentially, this is a one line of code. That's it. Now, because we don't, if you want to know if this actually worked, it'd be useful to actually log it. So that's why I sometimes have, I usually do log d, just so I know for my own purposes that this worked. So I would say log d on receive, something like that. Organize imports, and that's it. So it's second line of code is just so I know it actually worked, but it's not absolutely necessary.
So now this time you're not running fast. You're not creating tag and all those things.
No, I mean I'm not gonna have too much stuff going on, so yeah. Right now I wanted to kind of show you how simple this is, right?
So, can any other application send a broadcast?
Can any other application send a broadcast? Yes, and we will be sending our own broadcast as well. Yes.
So the broadcast doesn't really mean this does not necessarily mean spool up, right?
Yeah, the broadcast can be. There are lots of different broadcasts. Yes, and they come in a form of an intent. So we're gonna see that in a second. So we're done now with this guy. We're totally done. There's nothing else to do with the boot receiver. But so we now have what happens when it wakes up, right? So back to boot receivers. So we have this part. What happens when it wakes up? So this is done. But now we need to tell it for what we want to register. What we want to subscribe for. So what do we do whenever we define one of the new building blocks? What do we do next?
A manifest file you should add.
Exactly. So we go to the manifest file and we add it to the manifest file. So this menu. So the manifest file, bam, bam, and then in here we're gonna register it, right? So I can just I'll go up right here. I can just type receiver, right? Android name, oops.
So this is the receiver.
Yeah, it's called receiver, and it's going to be dot boot receiver. So points to the class. Okay. So we now have it in the manifest file. So use control space, that can help you complete stuff faster.
One quick question: how come it's showing here as Android manifest and up there it's showing Yamba manifest?
That's Eclipse just names it like that. It knows that it's a Yamba project, but it really truly is an Android manifest.xml file. Yeah. So Eclipse gives you like kind of like a meta name for it.
We have now application. Under application we have.
So now we have registered it, but we haven't said what it's going to be notified for, right? We haven't subscribed for a specific action. So the way you subscribe for a specific action is by creating a filter for that action. In other words, actions are intents. Okay, so we're filtering for intents using something called an intent filter. So it's sort of like the system is broadcasting like this, crazy amount of intents all the time, and you just say what you want to filter for, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go in here within the receiver, and we're now gonna add an intent filter, okay? And within an intent filter, we're gonna define an action, okay, with a name of something, and then Control-Shift-F just to reformat that to look presentable, right? So it's more manageable to understand. Okay, so you now notice that this looks very familiar to what we had in here in timeline activity, right? Does it make sense? Remember in timeline activity, I told you if you want to make this activity be the one that gets launched, all you have to do is make it this, right? And I said don't worry about that too much, Okay, so now we're gonna kind of worry about that. So I'll explain what that is. But basically, this is an intent filter that's basically specifying the intent that that we're filtering for. In this case, we're filtering for an intent called action main and category launcher. So this category launcher means make this particular activity be the one that is in the launch in the launch pad. What do you call it? The drawer? You know, the little thing that pops up. So if I look at this, so the fact that it's in this launcher, right, is the fact that we put it inside as the category launcher, right? And the
container where this happens.
exactly, and the fact that this one is the main one. In other words, it's the main entry point. It's the home page. Yeah, that's by the filter this action, right? It's pretty straightforward. So now, so that's why we have boot receiver, but we're saying trigger this boot receiver for a specific action that we're gonna filter for. That's what this says. Okay. So now the biggest question is, what the heck is that action that we're filtering for? Okay. And what do you find is documentation? How do I know what's being sent, broadcasted when it's a system booted and so on? So the best documentation for this is sort of to go to your developer, Android.com, and to actually look under intent. And some of those intents are actually listed here as constants. So what I usually do is I would just go Control F and I will search for something that has to do with boot, right? For example. And I found this one that says action boot completed. So I'm going to click on that one. Bam. Okay. So it says broadcast action. This is broadcast once after the system has finished booting. It can be used to perform application-specific initialization, such as installing alarms, etc. You must hold receive boot completed permission in order to receive this broadcast. So a couple of things. So first of all, this is a Java constant. It doesn't mean much to us in XML. So we actually need the actual constant value, which is this value here. Okay. So you're gonna Control C to copy it, right? And then in here, I'm just gonna Control V, paste it. Okay. So it needs to be the actual value of the constant, not the constant itself. Right. Right. So this is the first thing. Second thing that's important is it says in the documentation you must hold a specific permission to receive this broadcast. So here's the thing. Unlike before, I said, oh yeah, let's just start something, and if it doesn't work, if you don't have the permissions, it's gonna die, and that's the fastest way to know you don't have a permission. Remember with internet, right? So don't even think about like what you're missing. Just run with it, let it die. Look at your logcat, then copy paste from your logcat the permission that you need. Yeah, exactly. So the problem here is that you don't know what you don't need to know. Okay, nobody knocks at your door and says, "Hey, by the way, there's something for you, but you can't get it." It doesn't work that way, right? It's on a need-to-know basis. If you don't need to know, you don't know that you don't need to know, right?
That's another know that you don't know. You don't know.
Exactly. So be careful about this stuff, because I sometimes I'll be like, "Oh, it's boot complete." I'm like, "Why am I not getting a notification?" I'm listening for something that doesn't exist, which never happens. So I don't know that I'm listening for something that it's one of those things, right? So be mindful of that. So those are some hard to find errors sometimes. So I need to now add that permission. So, and again, I'm gonna click on the permission, and again I need to specify not the permission constant, but the actual constant value of that permission, right? So I copy paste that. You could also use Eclipse, uses permissions and kind of go and add it this way, right? And then use that. But I'm gonna do it manually. So I'm just gonna say under permissions, I'm gonna say Control space, use this permission, Control space. This is why it doesn't work. Android name, bam, and that's it, right? So receive boot completed. So basically, this is required for this to ever happen, right? For that filter to ever be triggered. So they go hand in hand, right? That's the things. So far, so good? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. I'm going to run it just to install my app, because I need to install the newly updated APK onto the emulator, right? I need to install the newly updated APK onto the emulator. Okay, so now, I assume now that it's installed. This is one time I actually am going to kill the emulator. So it's been, what, 5 days? So it's about time to restart the emulator, right? So I just shut it down, right? And now I'm going to start it, but I'm going to start it not by running the application. I want to start it without running the application, right? It's just equivalent of user just turned on the phone, right? Because if I click on here, it's going to start the emulator and start my application. Don't want that. That's not a fair check, right? So I'm just going to go and start my emulator, right? I'm not going to wipe the user data this time around. So I'm going to let it start. So my not going to be running, but I want to see if the service is going to get started. So it's starting. Okay, so my emulator started. Okay, barely. You know, if I click on this home button, you can see that there's no recent applications, right? So it's not like I ran Yamba yet, right? However, if I go to menu, settings, and then applications, and then running services, voila, there's Yamba updater service running for 34 seconds now, 35, and so on. Okay, so we know it's running, right? As a matter of fact, what I can do is I can also do exactly. I can do ADB. Let's see. I had Lockheed running here, right? ADB Lockheed that gives me too much information. But what I can do is I can do ADB. Remember how to filter it? ADB Lockheed, and then boot receiver column, and then column silent. Bam. So we know that got indeed logged. Yes. So we know that our boot receiver woke up and did its job and died. Right? So that's kind of how you can verify that actually indeed happened. So yes, if something didn't start, just make sure that you are listening to the right, that you register for the right notification, right, the right action, and that you have the right permissions. That's usually the common, mistake. Yeah. That's it.
Can I see it in the services also?
Yes, you should be able to see it in services, like I see it right here. So I haven't even started my app yet, right? And this is cranking in the background. And now let's test if I actually go to if I start my Yamba app, in other words, I start the activity. Let's see what the menu says. Menu. See, this button is proper. Because we walked into it while something else has started it. So see how we have like this loosely coupled stuff, right? Activity was totally loosely coupled to the service, but something else started the service, and and so on. But they do share certain data.
So I gotta move my app and then restart it?
You gotta install your app first and then reboot.
Okay, I kind of swapped it.
Yeah. So no, I did on the boot receiver. I actually created a new intent as well.
Are we getting the intent past this?
Yes, but this intent, good point. So this intent is the intent that walk up the boot receiver. So it's going to be the intent that says action boot complete. But it's going to be a broadcast intent. It's a different intent than what we are going to do next. So this is what walk us up. This is in case you have the same. You could have one receiver be listening to zillion other things. Right? Like it could be like network going up and down. I could be listening for that, etc., etc. Right?
I see the manifest point.
No, I don't see this.
So that is the important stuff. So while you guys are waiting for that, so what would be really nice would be to ask a user if they really truly want this to happen or not, right, all the time. So how would I do that?
When they download the app, you say?
No, I just what I'm thinking is preferences.
Oh,
So
restart every time.
yeah, exactly. So what I would this is an opportunity to add a different type of preference here, because we now have infrastructure, so I can just add a checkbox preference. So key is gonna be, start at boot. Oops. Start at boot, right? Title is gonna be new title. Title start at boot. Start at boot, and I can say summary. Did we use summary? Yeah.
What is somebody on, somebody off mean?
That's if you want to have a different text for on-off versions.
Oh, okay.
Summary started boot. Should updater should service start at boot. Okay, bam, something like that. Oops, the wrong one. That's what happens when you type too fast. Where's my summary? Summary started boot. Okay, so now I have a new preference, and what I can do is I can now in my boot receiver get Yamba. So hold on. Get. So context dot get application. So we're gonna do context dot get shared preferences for a name should start at boot, right? And the mode is gonna be let me see what the mode. Let me see what the mode is. I'm not sure. So mode is over user for default word durable and desired preference file. No, this no. We don't want this. We want to get default shared preferences, right?
Like something
So
you
just
said
preference
in
manager that get okay.
Default shared preferences for the context. Yeah. So this is gonna get us for the context. This is gonna get us the prefs, right? And shared preferences, right? Shared preferences, right? This organize imports. preferences, prefs, right? And now we can say prefs dot get boolean, and then the string is going to be whatever we named it here, which is started boot. Just gotta get it right? String. So started boot, default value false. So I'm gonna say, you know,
Started boot was the name of the prefs.xml.
started boot was it was the key. Yeah, started boot was the key.
String for that, didn't you?
What's that?
I thought you had a string for that.
Yes, I do. So it's a string. The key is a string. Started boot.
Like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same what we've been doing to get username, password, and server. So preferences get boolean started boot. By default, it's false. You know, so should we started boot? Boot. So that's now just a little bit more, you know, checking user preference, right? Just you know, so that we have a little bit of a debug information. And this is something that happens only. This only runs once, so I don't really care too much about the efficiency of this piece of code. Really, it's not that it's inefficient, but at the same time, it only happens once when the system is booted. So if I run this now, I should have a little checkbox in my app. That allows me to configure that, right? So Yamba starting, menu, preferences, and there's a little checkbox, right? Cool. Everyone happy with that? So what we've done so far is we've done a one type of broadcast receiver. So it's this type that we registered with a system event, intent, right, to do something here. Okay. So I want to do a totally different type of a receiver. So this receiver is different, timeline receiver. It's different in a couple of ways. It's programmatically registered, so not statically. It's programmatically registered to exist only during the existence of timeline, and it also listens to our notifications that we have to send as opposed to system notifications. So two main differences, right? So, again, its existence is only during the existence of lifetime of timeline. This exists forever. Okay. This listens to system, and this listens to our notifications. Okay, so here's the problem that we're trying to solve. If I go to my timeline activity, if there is a new timeline, and I'm sitting on this page, I don't know that, and this page is not going to refresh. Right? So status activity may know that, but I'm not going to know that. Okay, so like, you know, if I'm sitting here and I manually go into the learning Android status net, I post something testing timeline. Okay, obviously there's a new something, right? So it's right here, testing timeline. Oh look, it knows my location. Obviously California, right? Right? So we're going to work on that next. So it knows that. Now, if I start my service, so let me show you the ADB logcat first. So I'm going to run the normal ADB logcat, right? So if I start a service, which may be already be running, it's not, okay. So I'm going to start a service. Okay, obviously there's the new information, testing timeline. Obviously it's inserted into my database, I can test that as well. But this guy doesn't know. Nobody told it. Now if I leave the screen and come back, it's gonna possibly know. But it'd be interesting if it actually popped up right here, right now, right? Make sense? So for that, again, you're gonna use publish subscribe. I'm gonna subscribe timeline to that notification. Okay.
To a database insert?
Hmm?
To a database insert notification?
No, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have this guy send a broadcast. So you're gonna also learn how to send a broadcast. Okay. It's gonna say broadcast to the world. It's gonna say to the cloud, to the upper echelon of Android. It's gonna say, hey, there's a new tweet. This guy is gonna get notified, and then it's gonna do something internal to timeline.
So he's actually going to do the time check difference and say what is the last one he got.
Yeah, we're gonna build some kind of logic here. Yes.
Oh.
Yep. So let's start by defining what happens when this guy wakes up. But then we're going to worry about updating this guy. So we're going to do it in that order. So we're going to create timeline activity. Now timeline activity in this timeline receiver in this case, unlike this receiver, it's really only very specific to this guy. Okay? It's got intimate knowledge of timeline. Right? So as such, I'm going to put it inside of the timeline class. Right? So it's going to be an inner class. So I'm going to open up the timeline activity. And just at the bottom, I'm just going to create a new class. So I'll say, I'll put so timeline receiver wakes up when there's a new status. Right? So it's going to be, I can make it private, or I can just make it a class. Class timeline receiver extends broadcast receiver. So far the same as what we've done before, right? Organize the imports and then add unimplemented methods. Add unimplemented methods, and then there is our onReceive. Okay? So far, so good? So onReceive is going to get woken up when basically there's something of interest, right? We're going to have to deal with that logic next. But what happens when it wakes up? Remember, our job was to have this guy just to be refreshed. Right? And we already know how to do that. We have that one-liner. It's called cursor.requery. Bam. Right? So refresh the list once there's a new status. That's all it does. Bam. Just refreshes the list. Absolutely. Oops. Oh, what just happened? Oh. Okay. So that we're done with this now. So we know we have the second part. You know, if you look at the broadcast receiver, we've done what happens when it's woken up. We're done with that. Now we have to register it. All right. In this case, it's not Android system. Well, kind of is, but we're registering it dynamically. And the reason why we're registering it dynamically is because does it make sense for this guy to be registered when we are not on timeline? It doesn't, right? It only needs to refresh if we're looking at it, right? Like, what's the point of refreshing something if this application is dead? Not even,
Not
you
to
know.
mention you don't have access to the screen anymore. So
Exactly. Yeah, it wouldn't be the context. Yeah, exactly. So what we're gonna do is, where are we gonna then? You don't know how to register it, but where would you do it to register
like,
it?
Click on start, you could probably, there's probably something that says registered for event.
Right. So if you look at it, if you look at the life cycle of an activity, so we keep coming back to this, we would like it to exist during this thing, right? So it's only registered while timeline is in this state, which means we can register it in onResume and unregister it in onPause. Got it? So if you want something to only exist during running, you do it in onResume and you undo it in onPause. Make sense? So here's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna define those two methods inside of a timeline. So back to timeline. Do we already have onResume and onPause? We do have onResume. Okay. And so I'm gonna define onPause here. Source. Override implement methods. And from activity, I'm gonna add onPause. Okay. Okay. So, so what I'm gonna do, I don't need this anymore, by the way, because we're gonna obsolete it. So we just have empty onResume and onPause. So this is a good place to so register receiver. So register timeline receiver. And this is gonna be unregistered. What's that? Yeah, we did. I removed it because now we're obsoleting it. We don't need it anymore because now it's gonna be better this way. So what I need to do is I need to register this receiver and unregister this receiver, right? So
why are we doing this again?
this guy, so it's a publish subscribe mechanism, right? So you get to subscribe to something. You get to subscribe to something and get notified when something happens. But exactly, it's kind of like, do you need to be subscribed all the time, right? So boot receivers were subscribed all the time. When statically it's written in the manifest file, it's part of, it's whenever system boots do something. Sometimes you want to, as opposed to being subscribed forever, you only want to subscribe for a certain amount of time. So it's kind of like, when I'm in town, let me know if there's something good playing in the theater. But don't tell me if I'm out of town. I don't care. So similarly, since the job of timeline receiver is to update timeline, it only makes sense to do that while user is looking at the timeline, right? While the user is looking at the timeline, right? Which in other words is timeline is in a running state. So
what will happen? Is it like what if like I want some app where I want it to be refreshed even in the background, or do something like even though like as long as app thread is alive, I still want to refresh. So whenever I go, I see the latest without wasting any.
yeah, you can do. You guys get to cast this net however wide you want. You can say as long as it's in memory, I'm gonna do it. Okay, so this is a big net, right? I don't care where you register or unregister. It's up to you to pick your point A, point B, right? I'm just saying right now, for my purposes, I'm choosing this to be my net. I'm only casting this circle, right?
And one more quick question. So if it's running behind the scene, is it like consuming some battery or something, battery power? Or
Well, what do you mean by running? So that's the question.
Let's say if this updater service, let's say I configure like even if it's on pause state, like once the application comes in, even if I am not looking at any activity like timeline or any activity. But I still am my boot receiver is on, and
So you get so let's get something straight. Boot receiver does not run. It sits dormant until it's registered. So you register it, but it sits dormant. There's no code actually executing until something wakes it up. Until it gets this mystical phone call that says, "Bam, you're on." Right? That's when it wakes up, and then that's when it runs. Okay, that's the boot receiver. It's a one type of a component. Okay, now another type of a component is a service. Service is running as long as you don't stop it. So it's in a running state. There's a state called running. Now the fact that it's in a running state doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing much. Right? Just like an activity, it could be running, quote unquote running, capital R, running state, right? But it's sitting, it could be just sitting here, it could be just sitting here and doing nothing except being in your face, right? Similarly, on the flip side of the story, it could also be quote unquote stopped, i.e. in a stop state, yet it could be consuming resources. That's, for example, that's exactly what we don't want to do in this case. Do I want to, if I register receiver here and unregister it here, then is it going to be updating it the timeline even when it's in a stop state? Yes, it will, because it's active between these points, right? But that's not what I want. That's why I want it to be registered here and unregistered there. So only happens within this block, right? Does that now make sense? You guys follow? Okay. So that's why I am, and this is a pretty common thing. I am registering something here, unregistering something here. Okay. Make sense? So I'm gonna just define globally my receiver. So I'll say timeline receiver. Just so I define it globally, right? And then in my register, I'm gonna, first of all, if I don't have it, so if receiver is null, I need to generate it, right? I'm gonna say receiver is new timeline receiver, because if it's it. I am inside of my timeline activity. Receivers don't have on resume on pause. Activity do. Remember, this is the picture. Yes. So two different components. Receiver is the component that's going to wake up. It's gonna wake up. It's gonna do something. That is one job. Okay. That job is in the receiver, which is here. Okay. That's it. It's a tiny little, just like we did like a couple minutes ago with the boot receiver. It's got the name, it extends broadcast receiver, and it's got on receive, and it does one little thing, cursory query. That's it. Okay. Now forget about that. That is the job that's gonna happen. That's once it's woken up. That's what it's gonna do. Now I'm more worried about how to wake it up, how to trigger it, right? And so what we are gonna do to trigger it is in on resume and on pause, right? Of time activity. So timeline activity is registering. It says, look, hey, let me know when there's something new. So in this guy lets it know, right? But it only exists in the context of timeline activity. So as such, I want to use timeline activity lifecycle so that it only is registered while timeline is on the screen, i.e. it's running, i.e. it's in user's face, right? So now that this is just to lazily initialize it to make sure that we have a receiver. So once I have a receiver, I'm gonna say control space register receiver, okay, receiver, and now I need to provide a filter. Okay, so what I'm doing here is essentially the same what we did before. We did it in XML. We said register receiver for this filter. Okay, but this is in XML. We said register receiver, boot receiver for this filter. Okay, in Java I do it slightly differently. I get to specify the filter here, so it's going to be new intent filter, and then I need to give it an action. Okay, for some kind of action, right? Blah. Okay, so I'm registering it for some kind of action, right? Make sense? And then this action is whatever you want to make it be. I can say, for example, yamba.new status. New status, something like that, for example. Just make it up. Okay, so this is basically a intent filter for which we're filtering, right? So far so good. And then similarly, I'm gonna unregister it here. Unregister receiver. So I'm just basically saying, look, if I'm not visible, do not notify me. If I'm out of town, don't tell me what's going on in theaters in town, right? That sort of thing. This is happening on way out. This is happening when your activity is no longer running, but it's going to pause because next is going to go stopped, and who knows what's going to happen to it, right? But basically we're saying I no longer want to know what is going on. But if I come back into running, i.e. I show up back on the screen, I do want to know what's going on in town. Does it make sense? So that's basically what we're doing here. So this here, this one-liner, is the equivalent of what we did in XML. It's just that in XML looked like this. We said, let there be a new receiver and register it for this intent filter, right? And that was the action that was made up, right? So here we're doing the same thing. Let me just reformat this. We're doing the same thing. We're just saying register receiver, right, for some kind of intent. It's just that in this case I'm doing it programmatically, and I'm doing it for a specific amount of time between on resume and on pause. Point A, right? Point B. Okay? Those are my 2 points between which I want to know, right? So I unsubscribe when I don't want to know anymore, right? Is that kind of making sense? So all this is in timeline activity, right? So it's a different usage of the same concept, and just again, it's a publish subscribe. It's for a more specific, as opposed to saying, hey, yeah, I'm in general interested in Beatles, everything, right? Like, let me know when there's anything Beatles related. That's one thing, right? But it's a different thing to say, hey, yes, I want to know when there's if there's a good show when I'm in New York City, right? But don't let me know if I'm in San Francisco. I don't care about stuff going on Broadway, right? It's inconvenient for me. Make sense?
I still don't get this concept of receiver. I think we could have just done something similar for basically the update service also, right? Part of the service when we are activity is there, update, and then we that updater service we have.
Yes.
That could have. This is more relevant for that type. I'm still confused between updater service and this.
So updater service is going to come into the play, but so far, I'm just working on this part. This is how this guy is going to wake up and do something. Okay, we don't know when it's going to wake up yet, right? We only know the publish part. We don't know the subscribe part yet, right? We haven't done an intent yet. We haven't. There's nothing being broadcasted. We so far only said, look, I want to know when Yamba new status happens. I wanna notify this guy. When Yamba new status happens, I want to notify this guy, and it's gonna get notified by calling on receive, and we're gonna do some kind of refresh. Okay. But we haven't said when this is going to happen yet, right? Now we need to go to the service and actually broadcast to the world, hey, there's a new status. Does it make sense? We have one part of the equation. We have this part of the equation, right? We have this part of the equation. We have said what to do, i.e. refresh. We said register us for a particular event. So when a particular event happens, okay, we're gonna run certain code, one-liner, the refresh, bam, right? But we haven't created that event yet. So is it clear? I mean, do you see another angle, another opportunity, and something different, better way to do it? Okay. Anybody else? Anything? Is anything not making sense about this? I mean, this is all based on push, right? The alternative would be a pull. Like I could have said, as opposed to saying, hey, call me when there's something happening, I could be saying, hey, is there something happening? 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 Right? I'd be hella annoying, right? That's what our service does to Twitter, right? That is pull. That is pull. It's hella annoying. Every 5 seconds or 5 minutes or 5 hours, whatever, we're saying, do you have new email? Do you have or new status? Do you have 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 new status? Right? As opposed to saying, let me know when there's new status. And I shut up, I go away. Right? It's kind of like you guys remember POP3 servers? And you would specify how often you wanted to go and pull your email. Wasn't it dumb? Right? That's how it worked. Every 5 minutes we would go and check, do you have new email? No, I don't. Do you have new email? No, I don't. Do you have new email? And it would do that every so often. That is pull. Okay? So we do pull here, we explained, because we don't have a better option. We don't know how to tell Twitter to call us. It just doesn't have that feature. Right? But here we do. So we're using broadcast receivers internally quite a bit. So we can subscribe and then get notified, right? So far we have, this is the code that's gonna run when it's notified. This is where it's subscribing for a specific notification, because it could be listening to a zillion different things. We said, no, only call us when this happens, Yamba new status. That's it, never ever again. Only when Yamba new status happens. Okay. So now the question is, how is Yamba new status going to happen? Right? How are we going to determine what to broadcast? Because in the previous example, it was system broadcasting. I finished booting, battery is running low. There's a new SMS message, incoming phone call, whatever that is. It was system doing that. We just registered for something that's already. System is like throwing these events like left and right, stuff happening all the time, right? Now we are going to broadcast. So that's also where it's different, right? So who is going to be broadcasting in our universe? Exactly. Updater service is going to send a broadcast, and this guy is going to listen to it. So I'm going to open up my updater service. Okay. And the question is, when in updater service do we even remotely have an idea there's something new? Yeah, I mean, so yeah, exactly. So right now, We don't really know because insert status, we don't know actually if it's going to succeed or not, right? Because this is attempting to insert. We don't know if it's going to be successful or not. So let's see. Status data, let's go inspect in there. We have, so we have insert in here, right? So this dot insert just calls the other insert. So this, where's the other insert? The other insert now tries to insert. Okay. So okay. So check this out. So basically, here's how we can know it. Remember, ultimately we're currently using the database. So we're using insert with on conflict. So if insert with on conflict is not successful, it's going to use the conflict algorithm. In this case, I think we're using the conflict algorithm just to replace, right? Right? But so if row ID of newly inserted row or the primary key of existing row if the input parameter conflict ignore, or -1 if any error. So basically what we can do is we can use that as a fact. So as opposed to returning void, I'm going to return long, which is what this guy returns, right? Right? Yeah, I'm just changing it. It's our code. I can do whatever I want, right? So I'm going to basically return that code that the database is returning, right? So I just changed, I just passed that code, like the database. So this is going to tell us what is being inserted, right? Let me see if this. It's the ID of the database ID, right? What's that? So you put your mouse there and it tells you it's the row ID of the newly inserted row. Okay. So if it was successful, it's going to be the row ID of that newly inserted row, right? Or the primary key of the existing row if the input parameter is conflict ignore, or -1 if any errors. What's that?
What if we have radio rows and we insert that radio rows into the database? Which row ID will be inserted?
Well, we can't. We can't insert multiple rows with the same ID because that would fail on the constraint. Because the database is designed so that. Or if it's different, then it's going to be a new. If it's a different row ID, it's a different row. It's a different status. It's a new status. If it was successfully inserted, that means that it must be new, because it must have a new ID, right? And the ID comes from the cloud, not from us, right? So it's not like we are managing it, right?
So the insert is just one by one, not the batch.
Yes, this is one by one, yeah. So in this case, I'm just not sure actually what is. I'm not sure if because we're using conflict replace, so it's gonna be when you need constraint about the pre-existing row that are causing the. So let me see what's are removed prior to the new always. Does the insert or update always occurs? The command continues executing normally. That's not what I want. Because that's gonna always give me the IDs. So I actually want conflict fail. So I'm gonna use conflict fail for now. I'll test it because I want this to be a -1, right? I want it to fail, right? So that's going to return -1. And by the way, since this one is being used by the other insert, I'm also going to return long here, and I'm going to return the value here. Make sense? So I want to drag that ID all the way from the database back up, right? And then, so if I have that, then I can check now in updater service, do we have a negative value or not, right? So in updater service, I can check, you know, if it's a negative. What's that? So basically I can say if greater than 0, right? So if we have a positive number, then I can create a nice little new. I'm gonna create a little a boolean has new statuses, and by default it's going to be false. Okay. So now, if we do insert and we have at least one that is greater than 0, that means that we got a ID that is greater than 0, right? And then I'm going to simply flip this switch. I say statuses is true. Does it make sense? I just defined a flag here. I'm saying by default we don't have any new statuses, but while inserting in a loop, right? While inserting in a loop, if any of them is greater than 0, that means that something successfully was added to the database. So I flip the switch. Now my has new statuses is true.
So when it inserts, when it's got the same ID,
You get to say what you want to do. I said fail.
you think it's going to say -1?
Yeah, that's what it says according to the documentation, right? According to the documentation, when you try to do DB insert with or a conflict. So if we have a conflict, in other words, we're trying to insert something that already exists into the database, we get to say what it does. And I said conflict fail, and that's defined as when constraint violation occurs, the command aborts with the return code blah. But oh, you know what? Return code is. But any changes to the database. Okay, so that's a return code. Constraint failed. And what is the constraint failed? Let me see what the value of that is. Hopefully it's not a positive number, right? But constraint failed. Okay, next. SQLite constraint. I don't know what that. Well, I don't know where that's defined.
Okay, we can just try it.
What's that?
We can just try it.
Yeah, we can just try it. So what I can do is it's very simple. I'll just print it out, right? So just like we always do. Yeah. So in updater service, when printing it out, I'll say I'll just temporarily add a variable here, and I'll say I don't know, long ret or long ID. And then I'll say ID equals that, and I'll put. Can you do that in a? I'll say in parentheses %d, and I'll say ID, so like that, right? So I'm just gonna run it and just for fun see what's going on. So we're gonna run it, And it's easy to test because we're going to have a lot of duplicates anyway, right? So I'm going to start service, and let's see what we get. Okay, so it actually throws a exception, constraint failed.
No, that's the reason we added that field even. That's what we got. Remember when it was trying to insert the same thing again?
Right. Okay. So let me try then something else. So if that failed, where is the status data insert? So it's whatever this constraint we want, right? What algorithm do we want? Conflict fail, conflict none. Let's see. Abort, ignore.
What about rewrite? What will the replace do?
Replaces the value, but I'm not sure what if it's gonna check.
You also use regular insert with the
Try catch, yeah, I could do that.
And then it returns the regular insert. It returns -1 if it fails for any reason. So just
Yeah, I could do
return
that.
value. Same, exactly what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I could do that. Let me see. Let me just test this. That's a plan B. So what we're gonna do is run it like this. Okay. So menu start service, and okay. So this is not. So this works, but see, my IDs are the regular IDs, so I can't really tell if it worked out or not, right? I mean, I could save the ID in. I mean, there's some other logic that I could do. But here's another way, like you said. What if I, as opposed to insert with on conflict, I can do insert or throw, right? So I'm just going to change it. I'm going to use the different algorithm, right? So now what I'm going to do is, let me define it like this. So I'm gonna do this, and I'm going to surround with try catch, right? So if it fails, I'm gonna say red is -1, right? So if it fails, it's this. Otherwise, it's that, right? Something like that.
Yeah, like I said, one of the things I did was from my did the Yamba application, I added a loan, and I started at like 0. And every time I go to insert, I compare the status ID with that value to see if it's larger. So, and then at the end, when I ready to finish reading, I insert the oldest ID from the new batch. So that way, I don't check the insert.
Yeah, we could do that as well. We could actually check what the latest ID was and do a little, do it a little smarter. So let me delete this and just see menu, start service, bam. Okay, so see -1, -1, -1, right? So if there was a new one, so if I now publish something, testing IDs. Send, publish, right? So now I'm gonna stop service menu, stop service menu, start service. Okay, notice that this one did not have a negative value. Okay, so yes, maybe inefficient, but works, right?
Yeah.
So cool. So do you get that? Right, so somehow I need to know if I've got a new value or not. So that's kind of, I use the database. -1 just means it's an old value. That's all. So back to update our service. So it doesn't really matter how we got that new value, right? I don't actually need, I'll leave that ID %d. So what I really care about is this value if we have new status. So now if we have new status, so check if there are new statuses. So if has new statuses is true, right? Then I get to do something. Okay? And so what is that something that I want to do? Because I would like to do something that is going to trigger. Let me pull up the. I want to do. I know now that there's something new here. What I want to do is I want to trigger this guy to tell this guy to refresh itself if the user is watching that guy. So what is that we need to do?
Send broadcast receiver.
Yeah, we already have that requery and all that done here. This part is done. This guy is going to do a good job once we wake it up. But how do we wake it up?
Send broadcast receiver.
We need to send a broadcast. Right? We need to notify. We need to send a broadcast. This guy is already done. It's waiting. It's registered. It's waiting. It says it already called us and said, "Call me when there's something new." It already did that. It told us to tell him when there's something new. Now we need to tell him. So we need to go to the top of the mountain and scream, "There's a new broadcast. There's a new status." Right? That's what we're doing. So that is done by saying. Send? Let's see. Send broadcast intent, right? New intent, and then we specify an action. And now whatever we put here needs to be the same that this guy is listening for, right? Ideally, this would be a constant. So I would basically create a constant public static final string. String action new status, something like that. You know, just define it as a constant. It doesn't really matter.
What are the new status?
Just say it's a string. You know, just a string action new status.
Oh.
You can type it. I don't care. It's just a piece of text. However, yeah, exactly. Exactly, it's that piece of text. So as opposed to hard coding it, here's a piece of text. I'm gonna say updater service dot action new status. So just to make it maybe a little more clear what it is. Yep. I'm gonna clean this up because actually I don't care about that ID. That was just to experiment, right? I wanna make the code a little more legible. So that prints it. I'm gonna get rid of this ID thing because we now know it works. That's it, right?
Changes within the database meaning that you change it from no conflict to
No, yeah, I used as opposed to using insert. I used the insert to throw. This is slightly not efficient because it's exceptions are somewhat expensive. So you know, and we're throwing a lot of exceptions here. We're by default throwing an exception, so it's a little inefficient, but I'll worry about that some, you know, later. Right. The next iteration we would make it more efficient. I also want to get it to work, right? So that's goal number one is to get it to work, right? Goal number two is then you improve it and you improve it and so on. So for now, I want to test if this works first and foremost.
So in update a service, so if you notice that something is inserted, what do you call? You call that intent, or you actually call it standard.
I send a broadcast.
Oh.
It's kind of like I go to the top of the mountain and I'm screaming, "We have a new status. We have a new status." Now, hopefully, somebody somewhere cares about that. That somebody somewhere in our universe is this receiver, which we registered right here. So it only cares while we are looking at it. So this was the point A. When point B happens, it no longer cares. It says, do not let me know if there's something new. New stuff is still going to get broadcasted. Our updater service is going to go to the top of the mountain and scream new status, regardless if somebody is listening. So a lot of broadcasts could go into nowhere, right? Which is totally fine.
Status data.
Right. So status data.
What are the finally parts?
Finally, basically happens regardless. So this is always going to happen. So even if this fails or it doesn't, I want to close the database. That's the point. So I'm going to test if this works, actually. I mean, that was the whole point, right? So the test would be, I have the latest data, first of all, right? So I'm on this, right? On this page. Okay, I'm on this page. I'm going to go behind the scenes and update, send, testing, timeline receiver, send, bam. So this guy, so if I now run a service, okay, if I run the service, start a service. So now the service knows that there's something new. The service doesn't know. This is in the database. All is good. But did anybody told this guy? Ooh, it did, but what happened?
So that will automatically refresh now, right, and show the latest message.
Yeah. It's supposed to. I mean, it did. So it did wake up the cursor, but it's invalid statement in the fill window. So so let's see what happened. So we did get notified, and this guy did wake up, but what happened here? So here's what's happening with that one. What is happening is we try to requery here, right? But we're requerying. So what cursor.requery does is it reruns the query that generated the cursor in the first place, right? The problem is that behind the scenes, the database was reopened for writing by the updater service and shut down afterwards, closed. So inadvertently, this cursor got closed, and that's why it lost everything. Remember that we in status data purposely said do not close the database in queries. So we return it, right? Get readable database and rerun it. So I think that if I do, well, yeah, I may say cursor is, I gotta recreate my cursor basically. Well, we have this, right? So I may have to do both. So basically, let me see. Let me see if this is gonna. I don't know if I need to tell the list. What was it? Start.
Maybe I gotta recreate the adapter.
Yeah, refresh or something like that. I'm not sure.
I did was I put everything in a function, so I just counted from all those places where I need to fill the screen. But the main function, I do the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically refresh the data. Right, that right. Okay, so let me do that. Private void get data or refresh data or setup list. Right. So I'm just gonna put all that stuff in one spot, right? And then I'm just gonna call that from here. So setup UI, setup list, this dot setup list, right? So that sets up the list. And then in case we need to refresh, I'm actually just gonna do setup list. It's not this, it's timeline. We don't need to do it. I'll just do it like this. So let me retest that theory. Again, it's just a theory. Okay, so test number 2. So we have it running. Okay, I'm gonna go to retesting receiver, send. Okay, so go here, menu start service to force the refresh. Okay, so retesting is there, that worked, and bam, it worked, retesting service. Cool. So yeah, so that other insert would close the database, which would reset our cursor. And when I did the cursor.requery, it basically lost that query because that query was tied to the original cursor that was original database open cursor, right? So that's why. So yeah, so that worked. Okay, you guys got that? Okay, let me refresh what we've done. Okay, let's just kind of like talk this through again. So we wanted. This was the topic of this session was basically the receivers, right? I said, let me start here. So I said the receiver basically is a very simple implementation of publish-subscribe mechanism. You have a certain piece of code, you have certain actions, some work, right? And you say, I would like this to happen when some action happens. So you subscribe. It's kind of equivalent of, subscribing to, whatever, mailing list or subscribing to some kind of notification. When an event happens, i.e. that something is published, because you're a subscriber, you get notified. Okay? That's the mechanism. Publish, subscribe. Should be called subscribe, publish, but it doesn't flow off tongue just as well, right? So one motivation for us was to start our service at boot. So we said, okay, the action, the work that we're gonna do is start at boot. So that was that. So the action is gonna be simply start at boot. At boot, right? So that was done in code like this. It was very simple. It was I made it more complicated because I'm checking for preferences and yada yada. But it was very simple one-liner, right? Start at boot, bam, right? Now the question was, how is this gonna get notified? How is it gonna get woken up, right? How is it gonna get called? So in this case, the event or the intent was coming from some system. Something else was broadcasting this. We just had to subscribe to it, right? So that's something else that was broadcasting was a system, right? So what we had to do is, in the manifest, we would register our boot receiver, and this is sort of a static registration. It's registered for now, forever, as long as this app is installed, right? It's always registered, and this is the action that it's registered for. And we also needed to own a permission to even be notified of that action, right? Make sense? So that was a very simple, straightforward thing, right? So 3 pieces: what to do, when to do it, and then a trigger to actually tell you, do it now. Okay? Got it? Yes? No? Maybe?
So you check the network still or not?
I don't. That's another. Yes, I can listen to zillion things. I could have checked if network is on. I could have turned on and off a service if network comes on and off. Right? I could have listened to, like, only start this on Tuesdays and shut it Wednesdays. Zillion things you can listen to, right? But we chose boot receiver. Okay, all the network receivers, same idea. You just have to figure out the logic to check the network, but that's not the subject of the talk. Yeah.
What is the condition you have like before you start the service? You don't start unconditionally.
Yeah, I added the logic where I went to preferences and I checked, should we start at all, right? Because remember, I added a checkbox here. I went here in preferences and I added a kind of little checkbox. Should we start? That's this work here. So don't worry about that, right? All that. That's why it's extra, just because I wanted to add that. But that was a different conversation. So that was the boot receiver. Now back to another case where I need the receiver. So if I am watching, user is in this activity. User is watching this activity. In other words, this activity is in what we call a running state, right? Okay, and this guy in the background is pulling the data, and it happens to get a new data. Bam, puts it into the database. How does this guy know that there's something new in the database? It doesn't, because this guy got the data when it started. It doesn't know to go every 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I mean, why would it? It doesn't make sense. It's much easier if it says, look, why don't you notify me if there's a new data? So it kind of does a subscribe, publish. Yeah? So we had a different type of receiver that would subscribe to notifications if it cares about, right? So we said, well, the difference is that this one is not subscribed forever. In other words, why would it need to be notified if we're not in town? We're not looking at timeline activity. Who cares that there's something new? Nothing for us to do, right? So we're not passively registering it. Like, if I wanted to passively register it, I could have, right? I would go into manifest and I would do the same thing you just did here. Copy paste this, change the name, right? Bam, bam, change this to Yamba, whatever. Yamba, new statuses, something like that, and then change the who to call, right? That's the static notification. But I didn't want to do that because it doesn't make sense, right? Instead, what I did is I said, so this is what wakes up. This is the what, right? This is the when it's registered. This is the subscribe part. It was basically, we said, register it in on resume, register, and on pause, unregister. One line of code here and one line of code here. Okay, I just happened to create a new timeline receiver here if one doesn't exist, right? Make sense? And then basically it was, okay, what notifies it? What sends this action? What triggers it? What makes it phone call? It says now, do it now, right? Or goes to the top of the mountain, whatever metaphor works for you guys, right? So we said updater service is the one that would be good to know, because updater service is the guy that always goes and says, is there something new? Is there something new? Is there something new? And it does this every 5 seconds or something, right? 5 minutes, right? So we changed the updater service to when it's looping through statuses that it just got, to say, okay, if there's a status that we successfully inserted it, that would mean to us that it's a new status. In other words, we haven't had it before because it would have failed before, right? So then we just flip a switch and say, hey, there's something new, and then we send a broadcast. Right? So that's that broadcast that we're sending here. So we're sending a broadcast to this guy, and if this guy is active and registered, that means that this guy is in a running state, and it's going to update it. Is it now clearer?
Clear.
Okay.
I was thinking that somehow with the boot receiver we are using to get updates from cloud or Twitter.com.
Yeah, no. Boot receiver is receiving boot notifications, system boot notifications. Yeah, it's got nothing to do. It's listening to a different cloud, which we call the Android system universe, echelon, whatever. Right? That was the cloud that it's listening to. Cool. Want to take a short break? Let's do that, and then we're going to talk about something else.